Hello class, and this is Professor Bachner, and what I'm going to do is give a quick tutorial, some oral instructions on the communication concept paper. Now, the paper requirements and guidelines are already up on Canvas, and I think they're pretty self-explanatory. But for those of you who are kind of more audio learners or want my oral instructions, then well, here you go. So I'll try to be short and sweet and to the point, but really elaborate and focus on some of the things I emphasize in the communication concept paper. So first, let's talk about the minimal requirements. Basically, this paper is designed for you to analyze and investigate what you've learned so far about communication studies. The paper must be in correct MLA format. If you're comfortable with APA, don't reinvent the wheel. You could also use APA. Use at least one scholarly journal article. Watch library tutorial, and I'll explain in a second the library tutorial, and this is a major part of the assignment, which is basically grabbing a scholarly journal article. Complete library research. The paper should be 1 to 3 pages in length. Very seldomly I've seen a well-crafted paper in only 1 page. I would say about like 2 pages is probably a well-crafted paper, but as you see, the page length isn't very long. The paper is 25 points, so 25 points doesn't sound like a lot. I mean, if you don't do the assignment, you're not going to fail the class if you get an A or do well in everything else. But it is a couple points, but like I mentioned, I do want you guys to work on your writing skills, but it's not the major emphasis, at least in this communication course. And then you'd submit the paper to Canvas. All right, so moving on into detail, the description. This paper is designed for you to get your feet wet in communication concepts, terms, and ideas. The first part of the assignment is to select one communication concept from the first few chapters, chapters 1 through 7 of your textbook, okay? These are headings or subheadings. If you have trouble thinking of a communication concept, look in your textbook terms that are highlighted in bold, i.e. perception, kinesics, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about, if you're still confused, what a communication concept is. It's pretty straightforward. I have your textbook. Any term that you see in the textbook highlighted in yellow or in black, in bold, is a communication concept. And you can be as broad or as specific as you want with your concept. So for example, I'm looking at chapter 5, the language chapter or verbal communication, and there's a subheading that says language characteristics. That's very broad, but I could talk about that in my paper. But maybe if I want to get more specific, I could talk about arbitrary, which is a more specific concept under the umbrella of language characteristics. So you could decide from the first 7 chapters of the textbook how broad or specific you want your concept. But remember, make sure it's a term that's highlighted in bold or in yellow, okay? So anything that stands out is basically a communication concept. The next part is you must use a scholarly journal article. Now, some of you may be familiar with scholarly journal articles, and some of you may not be familiar with scholarly journal articles. You may need to do library or online research for this assignment. So if you find your scholarly journal article on Google Scholar, that's completely fine. I do prefer that you do use the library website and the resources that NOVA have for you. So if you're not familiar what a scholarly journal article is, in a nutshell, it's a professional research study written by professors or experts in the field that are peer-reviewed. So when you read a journal article, the language is very extensive and very specific to the discipline. There's scholarly journal articles in all disciplines, but I really do want you to focus on communication studies journal articles, or if it's in, let's just say, psychology or criminal justice, a concept that also connects to communication studies, right? So let's say you find an article in criminal justice about how officers listen during the interrogation process. Listening is a communication concept, so that's definitely an appropriate article you could use. And also, if you have any questions, you could also let me know. If you do not know what scholarly journal articles are or how to find them, I'm not going to go in this tutorial much detail in that. Watch this tutorial And the librarian basically guides you step by step on how to find a journal article and what they are and why they're important. Okay, so that's the gist of the paper. Let me talk a little bit about the formality of the paper. Your first paragraph should be an introduction. So just a nice, quick, interesting introduction with an overview or thesis statement of what your paper is going to be about. Your second paragraph should discuss the communication concept itself. So let's say, for example, going back to the example, I selected language characteristics. So the first thing I should do is clearly define and explain and cite the communication term. So language characteristics is blah, 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 as stated, by our textbook authors, Valeziano and etc., right? The next part should be describe an example of the communications concept from your own personal experience or a general example. So you could give a personal example, or you could give a pop culture example, or a hypothetical broad example that really portrays language characteristics or the other concept that you used. And then provide a transitional statement to discuss the scholarly journal article. Okay? So first, tell me what concept you selected from the textbook. The next part, you're going to discuss the journal article that you selected. So let me just change a communication concept, and let me just say if I want to talk about nonverbal communication, and I want to talk about eye contact and nonverbal communication more specifically. Okay, so I found an article about how different cultures vary in eye contact. So find a communication studies article related to the concept you selected. Clearly cite and identify the article. So put the title of the article, who the authors were, and then the next part is summarize. Tell me what the article was about, okay? It might take you a couple times to read the journal article because it is very intensive, specific language, okay? But in a quick paragraph, tell me the gist of the article. What was it about? How was their research? What was the results of their research? Number 3, describe what you interpreted and synthesized from the article. So kind of your 2 cents about the article. Should the researchers investigated a different group? Were there flaws? Did you find it really interesting? Did you kind of already have assumptions that that would be the results? Just kind of a little bit like your 2 cents, but we'll dig into that deeper. And that kind of relates to question 4 as far as like what was your critiques, if any. Do you have any critiques about the article? Well, they should have had more participants, or, they only focused on one culture and they should have focused on more of a variety. Okay, so that's the next part, right? The third paragraph, which is summarizing the journal article. And then finally, you need to analyze and provide a conclusion. So basically, give me your 2 cents about what you thought of your communication concept and the journal article you read related to it. What's a piece of advice? What's something you've learned from it? And just give, a nice closing statement, that's reflective and specific about your concept. Okay, so that's your 4th paragraph. And as you see, there's an introduction, discuss the concept, discuss the journal article, and then your 2 cents, right? Each piece should be about like a paragraph long, which would put you into a page and a half, 2 pages max. So it's quality, not necessarily quantity. Okay, finally, I do offer some tips in writing. Make sure that it is a scholarly journal article. So sometimes people select an article that we listen to in class as icebreakers, a magazine article or a slate.com article. Those are not scholarly journal articles. So that's why you watch the tutorial and make sure you're selecting one. You could always run it by me as well to make sure that it is a scholarly journal article. Okay, just make sure you review MLA, and if you need MLA help, you could always submit it to the Writing Center with ample time. Refer to the authors of the textbook. Do not use statements such as the book states, right? So you want to say, according to, Jones and Smith, they define eye contact as A, B, C, and D. Okay, so that's just a little pet peeve of mine. Review, cite how you cite. Okay, so you're going to have to practice a little bit citations, but in this paper, you're going to cite at least the textbook and the journal article that you select. Okay, and that's kind of stated in the last thing. So really, my tips on writing a good paper is making sure it's a scholarly journal article and making sure that you are following MLA format throughout your paper. Finally, this is the criteria of what I grade you on. 3 points for the introduction, about 8 for explaining the COM concept, 8 for the journal article, 3 for the conclusion, 3 for your quality of writing, and then in my comments on Canvas, I, will give you some feedback and, kind of point you into the right direction if you need a little bit writing help. Okay, so select a concept that you find interesting, select a journal article that you find interesting. Like I mentioned before, this is not an overwhelming paper. It's only a couple pages long, but really focus on submitting a quality paper that follows the guidelines. So hopefully that explains it all, and good luck.